Here we go. Okay, so just a disclaimer before I start. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. I'm not an investment banker. I'm a managing director of venture funds and private equity funds in the US and internationally. Just purely business consulting is like what our other company does. So from a disclaimer side, always find good lawyers. Lots of good examples for those that know cannabis, international regulations, business, finance, and for accounting. I've seen some of the best billion-dollar companies in cannabis fuck up major things because they didn't understand tax treaties, withholdings, implications. So this is cannabis we're going to talk about, but also know that the normal business structres are most likely going to be the keys to success or failure. And I also may offend your country or your city or your company. I'm not trying to do it. It's nothing personal, but just from what we've seen in the industry for over 13 years, you just kind of have to tell it how it is. And I also swear sometimes, so apologies in advance. Just a little bit about my background. Originally from Wisconsin, small like farm country. Never thought I would go from farming in Wisconsin to cannabis agriculture. But essentially after high school, I was in the United States Air Force, got hurt, flipped a coin, went to Colorado and started a small cannabis consulting company right when medical cannabis was changing from cards on the wall to commercial. And something very important about Colorado is we were the first program in the world that commercialized medical cannabis. We were also the first place in the world that legalized recreational cannabis better than anything Amsterdam ever could talk about, or Spanish clubs, like 21 or older standardized products, tested, taxes, $6+ billion in revenue for a 6 million person state. And then Washington and California and Oregon and Alaska and Nevada and now Massachusetts and Maine, another state. We're at 9 states in DC. That's almost like 10 places out of 50 with recreational cannabis in the United States. So I've worked in 30 states. We've won licenses in 24 states to start these businesses, medical cannabis and recreational. So definitely knew the US side. And then we started international in 2014. So doing LP work in Canada, and then those first German Tinders, and then 2 of the 11 Danish licenses, on and on and on. So the US, we got a really good understanding of what not to do state by state by state. And then internationally, equally have learned what programs work, what programs don't, what's a good investment, but always looking at this from the main focus of agriculture, business manufacturing, and distribution. And distribution, every company that talks about brands that doesn't understand distribution in their state, in their country, or how Aromax might work with international pharmaceutical distribution, you're wrong. Why build a brand, one, if it sucks and your product sucks and you have no way to get it to market? Or like in California right now, there's so many companies that are paying for shelf space and have distribution licenses and lock out the small producers from being able to get their products to dispensaries. Now that's very different than like Germany and having an import license, pharma distribution license, pharmacies, and actually having doctors with prescriptions. So always remember, the US is one thing, international is another. And US, quasi-medical, kind of adult. International is medical, pharmaceutical. And you have to always keep that in mind, even though we all know that recreational cannabis is going to be legal everywhere, or in most places. It's like when, and not so much an if, but every single time in the United States, there was a medical program that transitioned to recreational. 100% of the time, medical licenses and companies had first right of refusal or preference to get into those markets. So as you're doing international pharmaceutical and medical cannabis development, also know if 100% of the time in other places this has happened, it's probably going to reign true, just like it did in Canada and similar with Uruguay. So on a global side, we started like that little kind of blue state in the middle there in the United States. But having done cannabis industry for 13 years and seeing like those new states or a new country, look at Germany's first program. It's like we're going to have licenses for 200 kilos a year each. Like that was a joke. And then they realized, they're like, oh shit, this was this crazy program. You had to mail stuff from Bonn, partners, madness. And they're like, we're going to take all those back and do another program. Like every program is a guinea pig market. Or how do we test for pesticides? Or what's the tax rate that we have for this? Every program is a new example of what not to do. And as many, I recognize lots of good companies here and new people starting companies. You have to know what not to do in these other markets and don't repeat the same mistakes of other past markets. But as you see, it's starting. And every continent other than Antarctica, and I still, like anyone who has a research license in Antarctica, like we want to get down there. So it's like 7 continents, but like we're around the globe with medical cannabis. but how it started in California with compassionate care like 1996, how that's transitioned in the United States to have 44 states in one way or another out of 50 have some sort of cannabis program, 31 medical states, that's over half. And like our government can't like go after this. So when you think about what we did in the United States, some of the examples we'll go over for Canada and what's happening in the rest of the world, it's very indicative of other markets. And what you look at, like after prohibition in the United States, when alcohol was illegal and made legal, what happened in those 5-10 years after that moment happened? And this is pharmaceutical, international, like drug discovery, drug development, huge opportunity like tech. And it's going to happen, but not every single country is going to be growing tobacco in a warehouse to sell tobacco in that country or outdoor. Like we grow things agriculturally, we import, we export, and now the market's starting to allow that and change. The problem in the US though, like even being a veteran, loving my country, like what I do in America is federally illegal. Like every single thing we do is federally illegal. Aiding, abetting, manufacture of pretty much a Schedule I narcotic. Heroin, like we're the same. So when we go state by state, every single state is almost like a new country. Think about like kind of the EU, and there's different little regulations there, but we have no interstate commerce. So I can't grow cannabis in Colorado and then ship that to another state. So it's always like right now with all the companies that you're hearing about, it's always based on the licenses in those states where you have to have like local county control and then state control and like Department of Health, Department of Agriculture. New rules in each jurisdiction, and internationally is the exact same. Every country might have their own policies, regulations, what can be imported, what can be sold, who can do it, how many licenses there are, and license number determines business success. You think about states like Colorado, Washington, Oregon, California, unlimited licenses if you get municipal approval. Colorado, over 1,000 cultivation licenses. Washington, 1,300. You think like Portugal, there's 3. Like very, very different from a competition basis of how much you can grow, what products, like our vaporizers are allowed, our edibles allowed. Some states won't allow flower, just oil. Other states just flower and no edible products. Some states no beverages. Some states no refrigerated products. So you have to know the individual market dynamics of a production country or state. But when you have lots of licenses in places like that, the price per pound, or let's say like half a kilo, like a pound was like $4,400 US. Now in Colorado, that's around $600, $700, $800. So what happened? Tons of licenses, greenhouses, lowering the cost of production, outdoor allowed, indoor kind of went away. And it's still there, but the cost of production, you have to know each of these markets. So if it's costing you 4 times more to grow a gram than let's say greenhouse compliantly, as the market drops, there's a certain point that if you're not profitable, we said in 2010, if you're not profitable at $500 a pound, like a market price, you're already going out of business. Now, the only time that some of these states matter when you just have just a cultivation license or an extraction license or both is when you're making that additional value add of like growing cannabis, extracting oils, making products, and making standardized brands. In the United States, brands are a big deal. A lot of them aren't that quality, but it's really hard to brand, let's say, a certain type of apple compared to like an applesauce company. So we see this transition of standardizing with brands, but brands in the US and Canada, very different than brands internationally. So brands internationally actually don't matter when it comes to medical pharmaceutical. What does matter is quality and your price. If you meet the quality standard and you're the lowest price, you're the generic practically in the whole country, especially if you have distribution. So some of the examples from the US are very, very helpful, but they're also a hindrance if you're trying to copy the United States model or the Canadian model for the rest of the world. Those two are flawed programs in how they operated, but now with like Portuguese companies, Swiss CBD companies, German companies, the Danish companies, it's starting to happen, but where you are matters. Not every license in every state is good. I have cultivators in Alaska, way up north with greenhouses. Their price per pound is like $3,500 a pound still, but like their cost of production is just ridiculous. So once the United States legalizes medical, which will happen first, then we'll see some like international policies kind of start to transform in like interstate commerce. When recreational happens in the United States, all those grow houses built in downtown Las Vegas are going to be obsolete. But you think like Las Vegas, like Party Sin City, that county, for example, wouldn't allow any flower grown outside of that county to be sold in Clark County originally. So then you had to build a building in the middle of the desert to grow a weed very, very expensively in a concrete building. And that way, only if the state doesn't allow greenhouse or outdoor, and not just like plastic invernadero, like plastic greenhouses, but like glass GMP greenhouses, if you can do that for commercial production, for control, it's the only way to be a long-term relevant company, especially if you're doing oil production. Look at Tweed, look at some of these other companies. Like when Canopy's considering exiting all of their production facilities, there's a reason, because there's some changes happening. So we think about all these new states, all these new companies, all these new countries with policies. There's tons and tons of startup companies. We've worked with over 500 just with our consulting company over the last decade. And when there's lots of startup companies in a startup industry, there's going to be copious amounts of failures. So as an investor, when I'm managing other investors' capital, our own capital, how you choose where you invest your time and money is very, very important. And just think first, like cannabis is all sexy. It's like medical cannabis. This is this new thing happening. Business dynamics are more important than anything cannabis. We can train cannabis. You can learn this, the production, the extraction, the distribution, the science, it's happening. But if it's not a good team, if it's in the wrong market, if there's major product risk for like wrongful deaths and things like that, like that's all liabilities. So if you're thinking about a company and how you're going to scale that company to get like a return on your investment, if there's those risks or it's not the right team or the wrong market, why even invest there? Because just like .coms, like there were so many that started, but how many turned into Google? Like how many of the rideshare programs turned into Uber? And their IPO aside from that little kind of thing that happened there, it takes a long time to actually make a big, big company with value. But if there's those early warning signs or they don't have good business dynamics, run. Because right now, even let's say about $1 billion under management of like certain sorts of projects, the amount of capital we've seen wasted on garbage companies, well over 10 billion, not just in the United States, internationally as well. You look at some countries, like we'll get into Denmark, for example, all the startup companies or those 11 that got licenses, which we helped with 2 of, we sold one because it's like, why do you want to produce in Denmark? They have a 32-hour work week. Their taxes are high as hell and it's cold all the time. Other than like that one part of the year, not a good place to grow agricultural production for like international export, but it was the 3rd country in the world that had a pilot program to allow export. So there's value in being in a market sometimes, but not maybe putting all of your positions and staying there. You have to be flexible. Otherwise, if you don't scale and change and adapt, like the market changes every day. New operators, new countries, new potential threats, UN, like Interpol, like all these different regulations changing. If you're not very, very agile, you will get broken. And that's the difference from going to startup to like Series A, Series B to like actually like a public exit. So when you're thinking about like normal investing in this, if it's your time, your money, or your company, cover your ass for the normal bases. Like think normal business, cannabis aside, and then specialize the business model for cannabis. But if the business doesn't make sense, it's not going to make anything. Just because cannabis might be 3,000-4,000 euros a kilo doesn't mean that that's going to be the case forever. Or back in the day, it was like when you had a problem, you throw money at it. But when you have lots of competition and the prices are coming down and standards are going up, there's this moment of breaking. And we've seen hundreds and hundreds of companies go out of business in the United States and internationally. And then there's more and more every day. But focus on the normal business dynamics, just like a normal investment, and then understand the cannabis part. Otherwise, if you just think cannabis will carry you, it will not. Yeah, so like when I think about actually like the risk of this, everything about cannabis, like number one is we are a compliance industry. Like I love, like we're a compliance industry. Through being compliant, we have the privilege of cultivating, manufacturing, and distributing cannabis products. But if it's not compliant, if you don't know the rules in that market, or if you're going to start some like Swiss CBD company and then you're going to be selling to Germany and you're going to sell to the United States, like what are the rules you have to do that? Like if you don't know what those rules are and have good lawyers and actually do this correctly, you won't make any sales. And then that's no revenue. And then your time's wasted, your investor's capital's wasted. But the normal risk for this, it's knowing the rules and compliance. And if you focus on that, every company that we've gotten to like $1 billion type valuation has always had compliance at the forefront of everything. Over their logo, over their like wellness concept, whatever special thing they might have, it's compliance first. Just like a normal business, compliance, tax, and legal, then what's next? But if it's not good on those bases, we won't even go to the second page in a deck. So medical, when you think internationally, we used medical in the United States to get cannabis legal. And I'm on the board of directors for Americans for Safe Access, disabled veteran. Like I was a patient in Colorado in 2007 at first. Everything is like medical focused, but it wasn't medical in the United States. There's no doctors making prescriptions. They make a recommendation. But then through that, it allowed these medical programs to start to get medicine to patients. But internationally, it's not just use medical to get rec legal. This should be legal, of course. And it's a very, very medicinal plant we're just beginning to understand so much more of, but we've kept around for hundreds of thousands of years for a reason. And people have been willing to break the law forever about it. These fucking cows are hilarious right now. Just awesome. It's like childhood here. But if we don't have a medical approach and what your focus is, internationally you'll fail. And also there's like, we'll talk about a little bit about the International Narcotics Control Board, kind of a big deal. Like you don't want to be on their shit list, and most companies are. Any country that's legalized recreational cannabis is on the total shit list for Interpol, International Narcotics Control Board, and that would be like Canada and Uruguay. Thank God Mexico Supreme Court didn't go forward with their one program and now the medical program first, but always start medical. And if you focus based on the patients and doctor education, that's how actually programs evolve. That was the main flaw with Germany, which we'll get into. So there's obviously demand, like multi-trillion-dollar velocity of capital industry happening illicitly as we speak. So in a risk standpoint, it's like, are people going to use this or not? It's like, they already do. We're going to make it better and cheaper and higher quality and understood. So demand is only going to start to skyrocket. But the biggest thing that we have to do in any of your markets is doctor education. And that's not just saying like, I took this product and now my cancer is gone, it cured my cancer, but like medical studies, medical trials, like sort of continuing medical education. If you educate the doctors and you keep this patient focused, those are the programs that work. Programs that don't work, like Macedonia or others that we'll talk about that are good, that could be a lot better, they didn't focus on the medical patient demand or doctors. And actually, if you want to have an international program, you must be compliant in your country for what you want to do and for the countries that you're exporting to. So if you, for example, want to be a mass producer in Sri Lanka with some pilot program, but not actually allow medical cannabis for people in Sri Lanka, you're not compliant with the UN Single Convention, like the Single Convention 1961 psychotropic substances, the international bedrock of medical cannabis. That's your doctrine if you're actually in this industry. And the changes that we're going to get into that are happening with that are actually the secret roadmap to how this whole industry is going to unfold in the next 3 to 5 years. After that, you're going to be buying shares of like Amazon for 1,000. Like, so it's like this next period is the only time that matters in the startup part. And this is one of the key secrets to it. So when the World Health Organization, for the people that were at the UN in like November, December, it was just hilarious. They had this big report they worked on forever. And they're like, they did their big meeting and like the last couple minutes, they're like, and the cannabis part, they're like, yeah, we've reviewed it. We're just not comfortable releasing our results right now. And then they dropped the mic and left. So it's like, okay, what did that mean? Now we've understood that they're actually calling for like a rescheduling. So by the UN not adopting this in March, like we thought might happen, when this happens, we go from like every single country in the single convention, like 168, from having the ability to do these trade programs to mandatorily having to provide medical cannabis or products to patients in their country if a doctor writes a prescription. So I've got offtake agreements with 14 countries. Bedrocan's got 19 currently, and everyone talks about their exclusives. But to go from like 14 to 20 potential clients, let's say, to 168 mandatory, do you think every single country in that program is going to say, hey, let's start a cannabis production company or program and regulate it and understand this? Or are they going to be like, hey, we should just buy pharmaceutical products from people who produce them? But that's not going to be from Canada because they're breaking international law. So when the INCB, when they did their report, they're always a year behind. It's like they call us the stoners and slow, but it takes them a year to publish their report late. The 2018 report, that's the current one now, pretty much says like who's naughty, who's nice, like Santa Claus list. So when you're looking at investments and potential market risks, that's also the secret of like who is a good country to do this from. And the secret from this report also is that legalizing medical cannabis, no problem. Legalizing for recreational purposes, very big problem. That convention says you can't do that. So the moment that you legalize recreational cannabis, you essentially void yourself from being a big international player in the medical cannabis pharmaceutical industry. Now, currently, yeah, we've got Canada doing some of that, but it's only because they were the only people that had enough supply under even their GPP, crappy Canadian standards, no offense, which Germany was allowing because they didn't have enough supply for their patients from like Bedrocan, which was right there. And then Bedrocan's a whole nother story that, I mean, we don't have time for currently. So just to kind of move forward a little bit quickly, like there's medical cannabis, there's recreational cannabis, there's hemp. It's all the same. They're all a dog. It's one species. Like biology degrees, like biological definition of a species. Anybody know? Science quiz. The ability to make sexually viable offspring. So if I take like this dog and make this dog, that dog can make more dogs and it'll be half and half. But the only difference between dogs, just like we've done, is we've bred them for specific needs over tens of thousands of years. From like we took a wolf and we're like, this thing's helpful. Now we've got like little itty bitty dogs and Great Danes. Hemp is like our Great Dane. But the reason that we bred it that way for like paper, fiber, like protein sources, but it wasn't like the one that was really fun. But then we bred this other type variety, but it's still the same species. And the only definition of this or change is just THC, which should be THCA, which like some countries are 0.2%, 0.3, 0.4, or 1%. Switzerland, you rock on having that higher standard here, which is really nice. But know that this is a type of license. Medical cannabis is another type of license. Recreational is another type. But the risk profile, recreational, huge risk profile, medical here, and then hemp much, much lower. We planted one of the first hemp crops legally in the United States in 2014 under the Farm Bill. It's the first time some of these growers that had ever seen a cannabis plant growing outside, and they're like, why have we been growing this indoors for so many years? Because it was fucking illegal and we had to hide. Like that, but we weren't meant like to grow this plant in warehouses under streetlights, which until Gavitas and like digital bulbs, it was streetlights we were growing under. Like that's how I got into this. My care provider, I saw how he was growing plants in his basement, this medical plant that really helped me. I'm like, you're a joke. Like dangerous pesticides, like that's where this industry, when I say it's agriculture, this will get to 3 cents on the dollar, like corn or soybeans or other things. The only way to like get that value add is like if you're growing corn and making corn syrup, like, and then like having distribution there. But if you're just a farmer alone without like strategic partnerships, price is going to keep coming down. Big outdoor plots are going to keep happening. So we have to think about those. But like I said, yeah, bulldog shih tzu, you get some bullshit. So you never take like hemp and breed it with cannabis, but now we do because we found so many different cannabinoids in certain varieties of hemp. Like I can get for CBG, for example, or CBN, like 60,000 to 90,000 a kilo. Like for that, and everyone's talking about CBD, which is great, but 95% of the CBD industry internationally is completely bogus. Like even some of the things in Switzerland, no offense, like kind of are bogus too, but there are some very bona fide companies and a very important like cannabinoid out of 100 plus that we know. But there's more than just CBD from hemp that you can do. And long-term, this sector, like from hemp creep and clothing and protein, like huge sector that people are barely beginning to understand. It was too expensive in the US. We had like a $250 million lacking of like decorders or combines or how to like plant tons and tons of clones in a field like strawberries. So when this sector starts to change hemp, not just from the cannabinoid extraction standpoint, it's going to be huge as well. So we always go from one sector to invest into the other. But you need this in the bigger picture for your investment portfolios. The piece with like Switzerland has been so good. You look at all these companies doing this, and then Spain freaked out, the UK freaked out. Like this, we don't have to be novel food because like we had food products before 1996. But CBD is not 100% legal like everyone thinks. Everyone just goes around thinking like it's legal, and they legalize it in the United States in the Farm Bill 2014, 2018. I can cross state lines. Why are semis being pulled over and people put in jail for like hemp biomass? Because there's not understanding and people don't have high pressure liquid chromatography instruments to like test like things. But if you're going to do the international CBD and hemp policy part, I know some people have mentioned novel foods, which I've got a slide on. One of the most important things for you if you're doing non-psychoactive products. But if you don't have one of those 69 licenses in the world to do it, you're in a world of hurt right now. The FDA is kind of like the gold seal for at least like where an import market is for pharmaceutical. If you want to make a pharmaceutical product, you're anywhere from 10 to 11 years from like idea to pharmacy shelf. So cannabis is no different. But right now, internationally, you have medical cannabis flower and then oil. And then the compounding is happening in pharmacies. I can't sell transdermal patches. I can't sell vape cartridges or nasal sprays because those have to go through drug discovery and clinical trials and product registrations. So if you are a company doing like the medical or the recreational side, you have to think like long term, this is going to take more time than you think. Epidec, Sativex, GW Pharmaceuticals, years and years and years. But look at their stock now for even having one product with 2.5%, 2.5%, or 2.5 milligrams, 2.5 milligrams. It's 5 milligrams like of cannabinoids in a dose, 36,000 a year for that product in the United States, which is complete bullshit because kids with epilepsy their parents shouldn't have to pay such premiums on this. So these companies do get to bring medicine to the world, but the companies that are starting to look at how to work towards getting drug approval in the US, drug approval in other countries first, where it's cheaper and easier, South Africa, Israel, I mean, there's 4 or 5 that we work in for drug discovery. That's the crown jewel for exits for drug discovery. And how often do we find some new thing that we can make pharmaceutical drugs that change the world, that have hardly any side effects compared to what we typically use? But this is what you should be shooting for from an international side. This is like my favorite. I always talk about this because I mean, we've worked now in 19 countries, like with license work. And this game, like if you played it as a kid, it's always like you start and it's open and like you put your little pieces around and you only get to do this once. After you go around and all the little places have their, like, then you just fight. And right now, new countries are opening up, new opportunities. And that's where, like, where are you planting your flag? And how many flags can you plant at a time? You can't be like Tilray trying to take over the world, or Canopy thinking you can just raise cheap capital here and then deploy it around the world while back home you're breaking international law. It's going to be a big problem. But if you have something good, it always takes the local team and the local market to be successful. Anytime I see the big Canadian strategies of going to take over the world, it's not successful. There's always local problems and challenges. So like if you have a product, if you have a company, a team, a license in a unique place, what do you have? What do you need? Find your right partnerships and do it. But that's what we look for an investment basis, like that good team in a market with some sort of unique advantage. And they're hard to find. That's why we work all over the world to find these. EU is kind of a huge deal. I know we're not technically in it right now, a little province here, but the EU is like a crown jewel for what's going to be required from like a standard standpoint from around the world. With the amount of companies and countries that are in the EU, there's only one that actually matters. I mean, Germany is like setting standards with the bee farm, but it's Germany. I know it's pretty close, but like it's kind of a fucking crazy program, and it's going to take a lot longer than they think. But for even how much is happening in the EU, what's beautiful about the EU is when you are a country in the EU and you get a drug product registered, you're the same everywhere. Canadian companies trying to make products, you have to go to every company, every country, get approval, go through all this bullshit, all these testing, all these inspections. It's expensive. It takes a lot of time, and sometimes it doesn't happen. If you produce a product in the EU, you're good to go. And which countries in the EU are actually allowing production? Portugal, yeah, big fan. I live there now for a reason. Got 200 yeah, well, that was the first Tinder. The second Tinder is a little bit better, but still complete bullshit. So we got Germany, which sucks. Portugal, which is amazing, but almost impossible to operate. Greece. We're going to have some slides on Cyprus and Malta, but like Greece is the one that people talk about. Problem with Greece, though, is that look at that. I'm the unprofessional one. Sorry about that. I'm promise I'm not going to take that call. Greece copied a lot of Israeli laws that then made their standard deviation pretty much zero. But one problem with Greece, and like my parents live there, love it, have been there. Greece is in the EU, but it's like not like a favorable positioned or viewed, like just like, kind of like Italy, like corruption, business, kind of some weird things. Like a lot of companies and countries in the EU are just concerned on working with Greece cannabis companies and programs. Same thing we're seeing for companies outside of it, like Macedonia with like illegal shipments from one place to another, to Poland to then Germany. Like those things, once your company gets bad credibility for something in their program, you're toxic, because this is about like international pharmaceutical regulations. So even though Greece is in the EU, if they make a couple changes to their program, it could be very, very bona fide. But there's a reason I didn't go after like Takum and others. They went after those first licenses. Climate's good, labor, understood. But also just like Colombia, which we'll get into, which has massive opportunities, but 85-90% of what will happen in Colombia is complete garbage as well, because it's not compliant on an international basis. So EU, by them actually saying like, we're going to like change this, kind of be a leader. Canada thought they were, they're not. The United States, obviously, were like light years behind what could happen here. You will see major pharmaceutical development of cannabis and cannabis products in the European Union based on testing standards and regulations that then the intellectual property will be owned, brand licensed around the world. But when there's only a few countries that actually allow this to happen, that's where the focus needs to be. But the only ones that do are hard as hell. Or then you have like the Denmark side, that's just a pilot program, very, very short term. So you also have to think where you're positioning, what you're using that position for the next step, and not just get like run over just like you did in Canada. So by rescheduling and the reclassification of CBD, this set international policy, which is going to change the game, which is allowing so much of what's going to be great out of Switzerland, Pure, and some of the others to happen. But also there'll probably be 600-700 producers here that have no market or no opportunity because they're not producing at a compliant standards level. So a lot of Swiss investments are going to be complete garbage and waste of time, like kind of like smoking bad hemp. It gives you a headache. The same thing with bad CBD companies. Very, very similar. Germany's like our crown jewel. I'll speed up a little bit to go faster. Major problem though with this program, the doctor education piece, when you think of, they didn't even know, kind of like California, how many patients, how many products. But Germany for an import market is the gold standard that everyone wants for offtake agreements. But there's 7 main key players there that control that piece. So if you're in with them, you're very, very good. But the secret with the German program and the first tender, which now is my model internationally, if I meet the standard that they set, and I'm the lowest price, I win. So volume over margin every single day in cannabis, and be willing to have a lower margin in the beginning to just undercut your competitors to take the whole market share. But it's not about a brand. It's not about, are you the standard? Are you the lowest price? You win. And I'd rather be the generic of Viagra than Viagra any day. Because after like the first drugs come out and like the advertising wears off, generic is where it all goes. What we've seen, though, is it's so low, the amount of prescriptions happening, because there's not enough doctors that understand cannabis, and they only allow smokable flower and oils that have to be compounded. Once Germany is allowing product registrations, game changer. That's when like some of the new German licenses for contract manufacturing partnerships, that's where I'll invest into. Fuck investing into growing cannabis in Germany. It's expensive. Their VAT is crazy. Their climate's not that good. I mean, you look at Portugal, it's probably still 1/10 of the cost of Germany, and they're both in the EU. I mean, there's a reason I have a tan, because there's a lot of sun in Portugal. So it's been 2 years. We look at like all the bids, all the things that happened, all the Canadian companies that like tried to partner there. Over 100 million euros spent on that first tender process that went nowhere. The second tender process is a joke upon a joke. But if I don't apply for a license with a team in a market, there's a reason. And we did not apply for one of these licenses. And a lot of people did, and there's a lot of opportunity, but it's not going to be a world leader for massive cultivation. Innovation, technology, and drug discovery, yes. Switzerland, love it. I mean, I liked the joke earlier about like Belgium, but I'm not going to say it about chocolate and child abuse. But what I've seen with Switzerland, with this 1%, it's changed the game. Because outside of Switzerland, how many hemp varieties are allowed? Anyone know? Outside of Switzerland, like 2. There's 2 varieties, like hemp varieties, like the European Commission, that it's like kind of classified, and they're crap. It's the same thing with like Bedrocan having 5 varieties. When you're curtailed on genetics, you're screwed. You didn't have that here. The breeding, the research and development, like some of the tours I'll do tomorrow, I just have to figure out still Shandong province, like how to actually export genetics legally based on some of the R&D here, because it's been incredible with what some of the Swiss have done. But yeah, 500-600 of those will not protect that correctly and get these to the world market. If that's what you're trying to do, compliance first, that'll be the key to it. The problem is though, you'll have this hemp CBD side, but your medical cannabis program is garbage as well. So like know that by using this, like lobby and push for the next position, because that's where the huge revenue potential. And the non-psychoactive CBD side, very, very good. But medical cannabis, there's suffering patients here that need it. Use this policy to kind of move forward with the Swiss program. What was kind of amazing in like actually the stances that they've had, Switzerland, I do wholeheartedly believe, I thought Poland, Switzerland, Austria from like a hemp side, Italy, kind of like the Greece thing, like this is like one of the key countries in Europe and in the world for like non-psychoactive CBD hemp, and the legislation, the policies that'll happen. There'll be some great investments here, but know that like 90 out of every 100 can pure crap. So you have to be very, very careful with your due diligence. Austria, like their medical program, complete garbage. Hemp side looking very, very favorable with what's going on there. Nothing in comparison, though, to what you can do here in Switzerland. So strategic partnerships here with Swiss companies doing this correctly, just like you saw some press releases in public news this last week, will be very, very paramount for creating some huge valuations, public and private, in this next quarter. Canada is a piece of shit. I hate this place. I'm sorry. I don't have that one slide about the eagle and the. But Canada, essentially, great medical program initially, get medicine to patients. When they legalized their medical program as a country in a G8, that's what allowed the public markets to happen. But so many fraudulent public companies have hurt now cannabis, and then like raising capital easily, going and scheduling around the world. Canada has hurt medical patients like worldwide. Why is Tilray only making 23 million in revenue in a quarter when we have like California companies doing that practically a month? But they're Tilray. Why is so you have to look at some of these public valuations and what's actually happening and what's unique. But with Canada being the first to do this, it gave them major market position. But just like Bruce and others have seen, we have to divest of certain positions. We have to acquire and do major mergers and acquisitions with this, but it's not happening fast enough. And as oversupply is happening in Canada, there's like 700 new companies being built as we speak, construction to grow more cannabis in an already flooded market. But Canada, based on breaking international law for legalizing Uruguay did too, but no one cares about that program very much compared to Canada for a reason. No offense, Uruguay. It is what's going to happen then by them breaking international law. Germany and other countries are not going to allow their medical imports once there's enough certified compliant supply from other producers, aka Portugal or Denmark or some of these other countries, or Colombia with the non-psychoactive. So they have a very limited window where they're taking over the world. No one's going to be able to buy their supply in the future. There'll be other supply. Then that'll all be in Canada, massive facilities. I mean, a price for a gram, 10 cents maybe someday? It's going to be amazing. But that whole stock side, very few of those are going to survive because they didn't get into other markets quickly enough. They used it at first, but then they entrenched too deeply. The market evolved. When you look at all the companies that are listed and how many are going to be delisted, or when they're raising capital in Canada to then invest into the United States or other programs, or allowing foreign nationals to invest into something federally illegal in the United States and facilitating it as a public vehicle, problems. That's why I know I want to have much more time, but with Israel, all of the companies that got to list, some very good public companies, but now why do we have 40 new Israeli companies listing in Australia? Because they're all trying to do the same thing, but the Israeli exchange, Tel Aviv exchange, pretty much said, we cannot allow what happened in Canada to happen with our medical program. Boom. I always kind of like to make fun of Tilray for a lot of reasons, but it's not just about the money. You have to think about this industry and what we're able to do with these companies and products for changing people's lives. And this is that kind of heart moment of we only have so much time to do this, and there's a lot of shitheads and a lot of assholes using this very, very special sacred plant to just pump and dump stock valuations to buy Maseratis. And that's bullshit. We've seen it. Raising capital is hard. The first couple of $100 million we raised, I thought it would take forever. Now internationally, it seems like it's so much easier because international pharmaceutical drug discovery, you realize you've got one moment to do this and it takes a lot of capital, and raising capital is challenging. So everyone just lists, does some press releases and thinks that they're going to be able to then make these different positions. But it's not like Silicon Valley. Private companies, private investments, scaling and positioning correctly will be more powerful than the public markets on this side. And public does have an advantage for a lot of our portfolios for their exits. But I always love those Series A, Series B positions early on in cannabis. But just know if you do list and that whole sector has a change, even if you're a great company, you're pulled down with it. Why can't I get any shares to short Tilray? Or why do I have to pay 25 to 30% carry just to get shares to borrow to short them? Because they tied them all down because they know that their revenue to valuations are nowhere close. So if you're investing into publics, just put some money there, set it aside, some will make it. But most likely it has to be private side. Had a whole bunch more to go through, but we're out of time. It's Switzerland. Really appreciate it myself, team, Sergio, Olga, a few others are around, but thanks so much for letting me share a little insight into the international markets.
Thank you.